and welcome to today's virtual program, From History to Reality, Ukraine, Russia, and the Present War. My name is Siobhan Choi, Interim President and CEO of the Alaska World Affairs Council, and I'm so glad that you could all join us today. A special thank you to the councils in Miami and Oregon for sharing this program and helping us reach friends beyond Alaska. Today's program is part of the Evangeline Atwood Distinguished Speaker Series, named after Evangeline Atwood, who founded the Alaska World Affairs Council back in 1958. We could not do the work that we do without the longstanding support of the Atwood Foundation, our student sponsor, ConocoPhillips, and our incredible members. Our organization is in an exciting period of transition, and we have some amazing programs coming up, like next week's Global Responsibility and the Future of the Middle East on August 28th. Be sure to check out our website for future events and consider becoming a member of the Alaska World Affairs Council to help support our work. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Lisa Christensen. Lisa is an advisor at the Alaska World Affairs Council and the Honorary Consul of Norway here in Alaska. She brings a wealth of experience and insight, and she will guide today's conversation with our distinguished guests and then take questions from the audience. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Lisa Christensen.
Thank you, Siobhan. It is such a pleasure to be back, and what a timely program. So we are meeting here today at an extraordinary moment, one in which history is not just something we read about in books, but something being written in real time. And here we are in Alaska, a place with its own layered history and U.S.-Russia relations, from the 1867 Alaska Purchase to its role in Arctic geopolitics today. Our two guests bring complementary lenses to the story. Professor Serhiy Plokhy is one of the world's leading historians of Ukraine and Eastern Europe at Harvard University, and whose latest books remind us how history echoes into today's headlines. We had the pleasure of featuring Serhiy in person in Alaska in 2019 when we talked about atomic energy and the arrogance of man. It was a great program, and we are thrilled to have him back today. His latest books will be in the chat with a link, and it's so great to see you here today again, Professor Serhiy Plokhy. And we also have Mikhail Zygar. He's an award-winning Russian journalist, author, and former editor-in-chief of TV Rain, Russia's only independent news channel at the time. His work peels back the curtain on the Kremlin, revealing that human networks, power struggles, political calculations are shaping today's reality. He openly protested against the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine and then left Russia, where he was charged, convicted in absentia, and sentenced to 8.5 years in prison. We are so inspired by your courage, Mikhail, and we're so glad you are safe. And we are thrilled that you are able to join us here today. Welcome. So here's how today's program will work for everyone. We'll start with some framing questions for each of the speakers. We'll bring them into a conversation with each other, and then we'll leave time for questions from some participants at the end. If you have any questions for our speakers, just type them into our Q&A box, and your question may be selected and read at the end. Our goal is to not only understand what is happening, but to understand why, and perhaps what we can do next. So to start things off and to set the stage, I'd like to ask each of you, Serhiy and Mikhail, in one sentence, what's the most important historical fact and the most important current reality that frame this war?
Okay, I can go first. I can't promise one sentence, maybe a little bit more than one sentence, but the reality of this war is that this is the largest military conflict, not just in Europe since World War II, but in the world as well, in terms of the number of troops on the ground, in terms of the length of the front lines, in terms of the number of the equipment, military equipment being used, the casualties, and also war crimes. And it matters how military conflicts, the wars of that proportion end. I started with saying that that's the largest since World War II. We know very well that it mattered how World War II ended, who were winners, who were losers, because we still live very much in the world that was formed in 1945. This war, given its proportions, will actually define the future, not just of that region, but potentially of the world as well for at least 1 or 2 generations?
Definitely, I agree with what Professor Blocky says, but I would say that for me, probably what defines what is happening in Russia and Ukraine and beyond is the collapse of Soviet Union. And we used to think that collapse of Soviet Union in 1991 started some kind of new era in the world and formed another different world order. But from that traditional perspective, from that traditional historical narrative, Soviet Union did collapse in 1991. But unfortunately, a lot of people who are running Russia now, including President Putin, belong to the last Soviet generation, to very Soviet generation, to the people who were mentally shaped by that Soviet mentality. And for them, Soviet Union had never collapsed. And they continue living in that paradigm where Soviet Union remains not as an ideology, but as a force. And they definitely, probably it's fair to say that Vladimir Putin, still lives within his own reality, whereas Soviet Union should remain, or Russia as the new reincarnation of Soviet Union, a great force, should remain one of the poles of the world order, according to that point of view. Post World War II world order, Yalta world order, ceased to exist with the collapse of Soviet Union. So they really want to bring the humanity back, or to create some another not bipolar, not unipolar world order, but something new. And sometimes we hear that Putin is willing to organize some kind of new Yalta, but we see that his ambitions are even beyond. He lives in his imaginary world, creating some imaginary empire, and his ultimate goal is to remain in power in Russia as long as he can, probably forever, till the end of his days, and to rearrange the world order, to reinstall not communist ideology, but his new, very cynical ideology, not only in Russia, but in as many places as he can.
Oh, there's so much there. I want to get back to this. Let's start with the history, and then we'll come back to a lot of these things you brought up. So fascinating. And let's start with you, Professor Plokey. When we're talking about the history and the world order, how far back do we need to go to trace the origins of the Russia-Ukrainian conflict?
Thank you. This is a good question. For those who maybe watched the Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin, you know that he started in the medieval era with the history of the Kievan Rus and princes, and completely lost, of course, the interviewer and also the audience, the American audience. So that's at least in the mind of the person who is most responsible for this war. That's where the start is. That's where the beginning is. And he claimed again and again that Russians and Ukrainians were one and the same people, which really, if you translate that into any language that makes sense, meant that Ukrainians don't exist. And in that sense, he goes in his mind to the 10th century, to the Vikings, to the 11th century. But what he does, he retranslates the ideas of the late 19th and the beginning of the 20th century of Imperial Russia. And it is that ideology in which there existed one big Russian nation, or at least existed in the mind of imperial rulers, and there was no place for Ukrainians or Belarusians for that matter. That's his ideal for the future. So he goes into the 19th century, takes the model from there, from historians like Kluchevsky, from the political figures and ideologues of the imperial Russia, and then tries to bring it into the 21st century, and we see what the outcome is. So in terms of the ideology of this war, I call it the 19th century war in terms of ideology, the 20th century war in terms of the tactics that are being used, and 21st century war in terms of the technology, but also the impact and consequences of the war.
So, Mikhail, let's talk a little about Putin using history. So, accurately or inaccurately, how is he using history to justify the invasion of Ukraine?
Yeah, it's very important, I think, to differentiate history and historical myths. And Putin is using historical mythology or historical propaganda that was created during the 19th and 20th century in Russia. Professor Plochy wrote several brilliant books, which are must read for Tucker Carlson or for any viewer of that notorious, infamous interview. And I also tried to contribute, and my last published book was called War and Punishment, and it was specifically about that mythology, how Putin is trying to use all historical mythology that Russian Empire was exploiting during the 19th century and in 20th century. But at the same time, I think that it's very important to emphasize that most of that mythology was or seemed to be irrelevant till 2014. Actually, 2014, the moment when Putin started occupation of Crimea, was in a way the turning point, because before that, the idea of making Russia great again, the idea of turning Russia from country which was seemingly trying to be a modern European country, that strategy was stopped. And there was no social demand, to my mind, in Russia to invade Crimea and to bring it back. It was a very unprepared decision by Vladimir Putin. It was not a popular demand of Russian society. Unlike we know a lot of territorial conflicts, a lot of disputed territories. Kosovo is, for example, still a bleeding wound for many Serbs, and Crimea was not for Russians. The idea of Russian troops occupying Crimea was quite a surprise for many, and it was not a bleeding wound for Russians before 2014. But that was the important turning point when that imperial mythology or post-imperial mythology started being spread in Russia as a cancerous disease. And during the last 10, 12 years, Russian propaganda was focusing on those historical myths that there was one single historical line that unifies legendary Prince Rurik, mythical founder of Kievan Rus, and Vladimir Putin. Another myth that Ukrainian language does not exist at all. Another myth that Ukraine was invented by Lenin, which sounds really ridiculous to anyone who knows anything about Ukrainian culture or Ukrainian language or Ukrainian literature, Ukrainian history. But by now, we know that during the last 3 years, a lot of people in Russia have been brainwashed, and for many people in Russia now, it doesn't sound ridiculous. There were a lot of historical myths, like the mythical betrayal of Ukraine, that Ukrainians for many centuries have been betraying Russians, and that's why they should be punished, because they haven't been loyal, and they were trying to make a secret alliance with the West, with Western Europe, against the interests of Russia. And Putin repeats again and again all those historical myths. They have replaced any historical all the historical facts, and we know that the person who used to be Minister of Culture of Russian Federation, Vladimir Medinsky, and ironically, he usually heads the Russian delegation during the negotiations with Ukraine, is now infamously authored few official history textbooks for Russian schools, and there is the official propagandist version of history without any independent Ukraine, without Ukrainian culture, without Ukrainian history. And yeah, it's amazing that we have always known that history could be weaponized, and it was weaponized many times in history. But what is happening right now, and how convincing it sounds for many American journalists like Tucker Carlson, that is surprising.
Okay, so here let's Serhi, let's talk about some of these historical myths. This is really fascinating. So, what are some of these historical myths that Russia leans on, and what's actually true?
The mythology that is being used, again, it is deeply rooted not only in the imperial past, but also in the past of the Russian Revolution of 1917. Because what you can see in Putin, you can also find in the memoirs of General Anton Denikin, one of the commanders of the White Forces. So you have this, the embrace of the Russian imperial narrative and critique of the communist narrative associated with Lenin and even with Stalin. So for Putin, Lenin is not good because, as Mikhail just said, he allegedly created Ukraine, when in reality, Lenin launched the war on Ukraine, which was autonomous in the Russian Federation after the war, and fighting against the Bolshevik invasion, declared its independence in 1918. So if you count that being a creation of Ukraine, attacking the country and then country declaring independence, then there is something into it. But generally, this is clearly a mythology that was created by the white generals back during the revolution, and now is being reused again. Another very important theme that is being used now, not related to Ukraine, but other alleged reason or explanation for the war, the casus belli for the war, is the expansion and of NATO, movement of NATO in Eastern Europe. And there are references to alleged deal that was reached by Mikhail Gorbachev and the American President George H.W. Bush at that point, and Secretary of State Baker. Baker and Gorbachev are saying again, and at least Gorbachev was saying, as long as he was alive, that nothing of that sort happened. We have the minutes of the conversation. We see that was an offer. Gorbachev was not interested in that, and then the entire conversation moved somewhere else. But it doesn't really matter. It was used first by President Yeltsin trying to sell a particular sort of agreement to the West, and make sure that it was approved by the parliament. And now it is being used by Putin. And this myth, unlike the myth about Lenin creating Ukraine, which everyone loves about that, the idea about NATO and the agreement that there would be no movement, it's being bought also by part of the American political class and being recycled now in the United States and in Europe as well. So I would say that these are two key mythologies. And the third one is, and I will stop there, is an attempt to use this idea that the Ukraine, which is a democratic country, one of few former republics of the Soviet Union, where democracy, electoral democracy survived, that somehow it is a dictatorship, somehow this is a fascist state, somehow this is a Nazi state. And we can go long about that, trying to show that this is not true, but the very fact that you have, and you can see that during also the latest visit of Ukrainian delegation to Washington, well, it's really very difficult to convince people that we have a fascist state in Ukraine with the Jewish president, with the minister of defense. Till recently, it was Crimean Tatar, with the commander of the armed forces of Ukraine, who is an ethnic Russian born in Russia. So those people who are not fighting for some sort of autocracy or pseudo-fascist state, they're fighting for particular values that Ukraine, unlike Russia, was able to preserve after the disintegration of the Soviet Union in 1991.
So, Mikhail, one more question about these myths that they're hearing from the Russian leadership. Why do they still work with their audiences?
Why?
Yeah, why are these myths still resonating and being heard and working for their audience? Or are they being disregarded by local audiences?
It's what is important that most of those myths, as we both mentioned, were not created 3 years ago. Basically, Russian historical propaganda was created even before 19th century. It was probably codified by the founder of Russian history, the court historiographer of Emperor Alexander I, the greatest Russian historian, Nikolai Karamzin. And that's that point of view on Ukraine, that it has been ever the integral part of Russia, and it should be the part of Russia. And there is like some kind of trinity of Slavic nations, Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians that are doomed to be together. That's the mythology that has always been there. It was in the historical textbooks in the 19th century, in 20th century. So no matter how different regimes were, whether it was Russian Empire, whether it was Soviet Union or post-Soviet Russia, different approaches were changing. The point of view, for example, when Soviet Union collapsed, Russian textbooks were rewritten, and the approach to the Soviet legacy was revisited. But it never touched the more deeply rooted facts, just like Russian Empire as such has never been called the colonial empire. The idea that Russia could be called colonial empire has always been attacked by even liberal Russian historians and liberal Russian audience. They were saying that no, Russia should not be called colonial empire, because colonial empire is Britain. Is British Empire, because only those territories overseas they could be called colonies. And actually, it's very ironic that the proof that Russia had colonies overseas is Alaska. That actually Russia did have colonies overseas, but even without Alaska, definitely there is no difference between colonization of Siberia, for example, and colonization of North America by Britain. And that all those deeply rooted myths about Ukraine and about the uh, mm, the common history and the dependence of Ukraine on Russia, and about the Russian civilization that was enlightening its little brothers and sisters, that was helping them to survive. That colonial approach um, has never vanished from Russian textbooks. So that's the way how a lot of people used um, to see Ukraine. Or we can take, for instance, great Russian literature. Alexander Pushkin, who was the greatest Russian author, and who had different views on the state, on the democracy and democratic reforms during his life. But in the beginning of his life, he was writing few things that could be called deeply imperialistic and deeply colonial. And for example, his famous poem called Poltava glorifies Peter the Great and curses Hetman Mazepa, the military leader of Ukraine. So, even this masterpiece of Russian literature has never been questioned and has never been viewed as the part of political or cultural propaganda. So yeah, for many Russians, it's really hard to start reframing their approach to their own history because they have never heard anything
That
different
makes
from
sense.
that.
And Sergey, so if Vladimir Putin were in your classroom at Harvard, how would you grade his version of Ukraine history?
Oh, I don't know that he would pass even the first test, and in the middle of the semester, I would have to report his performance to the administration. So they are asking us in the middle of semester on students who are not doing well, and normally I don't have anybody to report. There is some progress. I don't see any progress in terms of either Vladimir Putin's thinking about history, but what is much more disturbing for me, what Mikhail mentioned about that more and more people in Russia are being brainwashed by this nonsensical, absolutely very highly mythological and imperialistic view of Russian history, but also history of Ukraine and history of the world in general. So yeah, I don't think that the mark would be anywhere above C or maybe E, somewhere in that range.
I'd love to add one thing, if I may. I cannot imagine Vladimir Putin at Professor Bloch's class because definitely Vladimir Putin would never go there because he's sure that he knows everything. He knows everything about everything, but in during his life, he's going to be 73 this year in 2 months, but majority of his life until he was 40, he spent in the Soviet Union. So he is the child of the Soviet culture and Soviet approach to history. And he thinks that he knows everything about Ukraine. When he got married for his honeymoon, he had a road trip from St. Petersburg to Crimea. He was driving his car. They had only one stop in Kiev because his new wife loved theater, so they went to opera theater in Kiev. And then they continued all the way through Ukraine to Crimea. So he has been to Ukraine as a young man many times. As a KGB officer, he used to know a lot of people from Ukraine, and they were Russian-speaking Ukrainians. Till now, right now, in his administration and in his government, there are a lot of people who were born in Ukraine. They are Russian-speaking Ukrainians, and they have certain very Soviet approach. So in that circle, in that bubble, there is some kind of deeper knowledge. They know everything. actually they know nothing, but they are very satisfied with their mythology, and like they don't really want to know anything because it's so comfortable to use that historical mythology. I think it's very important that he is a very cynical person. This war is happening first, not because of his beliefs, but because to my mind, it's important that this is a war for Russia and for his control of Russia. And also, this is a war against the West. So it's not only about Ukraine. It's not only about his aim is not to control Ukrainian territory. He has much more complex issues. But what it helps him that he sincerely is not interested in any other um, versions, in any other books or revelations about history. He knows everything he needs.
Okay, so let's move ahead to that, to the Kremlin power and survival. And Mikhail, in your book, War and Punishment, you talk about how Russia's elites are trapped in a system, sorry, where survival depends on their loyalty to Putin. So can you talk a bit about this and how does that dynamic affect any chances of negotiation today with such a loyalty to Putin?
Um, we saw that in the beginning before the invasion, and we see it now that he is more or less the only person who takes all the meaningful decisions. In my first book about the nature of Putin's regime and about his inner circle, I had the term collective Putin. But I explained that collective Putin is not some kind of Politburo or a broader circle of people who is ruling Russia. No, that's Russian bureaucracy that doesn't have any opinion or knows how to conceal their point of view because they are always trying to guess what Putin thinks and are trying to fulfill his orders before they even hear all those orders. We saw that. We saw how collective Putin works a few days before the beginning of invasion, when Putin was having the Security Council meeting in Kremlin, and it seemed ridiculous. Only if it was not about the war. He asked every prominent member of his inner circle of his government one by one to stand up and to testify, to give their opinions, and some of them were trembling. Some of them didn't know what to do, what to say. They looked like they were school children next to the board, and the teacher was very strict, and sometimes he was shouting, and they were ready to say yes to anything he wanted, and they didn't know. So they really, most of them didn't know about his plans to start the full-scale invasion. We know that, for example, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov didn't know on the day one, on February 24th, that the war was going to start, or the head of Russian state-owned arms monopoly, Sergei Chemizov, was not aware of the war. He was not even in Moscow that day. He was in Israel when the war started, and he was obviously the person who was obliged to know that. And we see that till this day. We see that, or at least I hear that from most of my sources, that a lot of people in Russian political elite would be happy to have ceasefire, to have the war stopped. They were very hopeful when Donald Trump started putting pressure on President Putin. But unfortunately, they all know that for Putin, that's a non-starter. Putin doesn't need that peace. He's really convinced that the war is the best mechanism to control the country, that the war is justified for him as the ideal tool to control the country. He has already restructured Russian economy. He has already got rid of part of Russian civil society, and for him, this war should go on, and he doesn't see the necessity to end it. And majority of Russian political and business elite knows that, so they have to adjust their own mindset with that knowledge. They cannot change anything. So yeah, and no matter what's happening with the economy, we see that Russian economy is not collapsing so far. Everyone was expecting it to collapse in 2022. It did not. So Putin, they were sure that Putin was a dead man walking. No, economy did not collapse, and he was right. And they think that after all, he's always right. After his visit to Alaska, he proved to all Russian elite that he is the only one who really knows what to do. He can prove to the whole world that he is not isolated, that he can visit the United States, he can negotiate with the American president. He is the only visionary. He's the only guarantor for their own stability.
Okay, so Serhii, do you agree with that? Is there anyone who you think could actually push Putin toward ending the war,
Well,
inside or outside?
certainly Putin didn't expect a big war that he got. That was the reason why the whole thing was called a special military operation. So in my mind, he wanted to repeat the huge success of the Crimea when his approval rating went through the roof. But overall, he then found a way to adjust the political system, the economic system. But it's not forever. We see that Russian economy didn't collapse so far, but the indications that it can't, in that form, it can't go forever, are certainly growing and are there. And this is the only factor that really can influence Putin's decisions, because he found the way to control the society and produce more and more people for the war. The number of the soldiers that are being actually thrown and really then disposed of for every square meter of Ukrainian territory is astounding. But that machine produces more and more and more soldiers, and the expectations that the Russian society somehow would react to what is happening and influence Putin's decisions. Those expectations came in 2022 and went, and partially went also with the largest political migration out of Russia since 1917. So it's the economy is the only factor that can influence the Putin's policies. And the United States of America and the European countries have, of course, a lot of leverages in economic terms. Not all leverages that are out there. There is, of course, India, there is China, but there is the toolbox is still quite significant, and a lot of those tools were not used. So in my opinion, the hope that somehow Putin tired of that war, that he wants to end it, I absolutely agree with Mikhail on that. That's really the false hope. The war can be stopped only in the conditions where Putin sees on the horizon a major economic downturn that can produce real threat, political threat also to his regime.
So for either of you then, if you could design the first three steps that would lead towards durable peace, what would they be? And which one would be the politically hardest to sell?
Let me start probably. I would add one more thing. Probably the most important factor is the factor of the unexpected, because we saw that. We saw the unexpected factor during the first year of the war, and that factor was Yevgeny Prigozhin. That was the person who was who was almost an outsider, who was well known inside Putin's circle. He was uh, a minor oligarch from Putin's inner circle, but somehow he became irrational, and he became the new unexpected center of power, not controlled by Putin at some point. And that was the real factor that really destabilized the system very quickly. And it was clear at that moment that that was a real danger for Putin, because everything was going wrong and he was not able to control the system, and every piece of that system felt it. So our goal is probably to create some I don't know how, I'm not an economist and I'm not the magician, so I'm not sure how all those centers of factors of unexpected could be created, but I do know that the stability that can be obvious in Russia for decades, then overnight could turn into huge turbulence and huge instability because of a minor factor. Speaking about economy, yeah, definitely. If only sanctions worked, that would be completely different Russia and completely different state of Russian economy. We see that they don't work, and I'm sure from what I hear from my sources, Russian authorities, Russian elites know much better how sanctions don't work. So they are really skeptical when they hear about secondary sanctions from President Trump. They don't buy that. They don't believe in that. They know that probably the key factor of Russian if not prosperity, but like of Russian economic stability is Russian oil and gas. And really to attack Russian capability to export oil and gas would target American consumers. So if Russia is prevented from selling its oil and gas to the world market, that would affect every gas station in America, and every American citizen would feel it. And I'm not sure that any American administration is ready to do that. So that would last time a huge crisis was felt by Carter administration, and Jimmy Carter lost his presidential election after those huge lines next to the gas stations. I think American politicians remember that. So attacking Russian oil and gas sector is a threat to American stability. But I don't think that it's possible to do anything with current Russian economy without thinking about that. We see that all sanctions were not really effective. Russia continues selling oil and gas not only to its major partners like China, India, and Turkey, but through the third parties to other consumers, to the European Union. So almost no sanctions that were supposed to work are working, because they were probably designed in the way that they didn't hurt the real basis of Putin's stability. So that would be probably the most important strategy: how to make Russian oil and gas, how to prevent Russian oil and gas from the world market.
Oh gosh, I remember those long lines. Even in Alaska, we had those. So I want to get to our questions. We've got a lot coming through the chat room. One last thing, really quickly. 1 year from now, what's the best case scenario, and what's the biggest risk in getting there?
Yes, the best case scenario is armistice. It can be called different names. It can be called the most permanent peace in the or eternal peace in the world history. It doesn't matter. But I don't see the stable peace coming to the region without actually collapse of the Russian regime. So anything that can be achieved would be a temporary arrangement. Of course, we know that some temporary arrangements, like in Korea, can last for a long period of time. But my best case scenario for 1 year from now would be a stable ceasefire and a stable armistice.
Mikhail, are you a little more than that?
Unfortunately, my best case scenario would be if it's a really best case scenario, it would be a bit fantastic, but the best case scenario is Putin is gone. So I do believe that when he's gone, the situation is going to be very different, and it's going to be better. Because a lot in this war is the consequence of his own decisions. I don't know how we know that not to see him in Kremlin would probably mean that he should die. But probably if he's given a Nobel Peace Prize and he's convinced to become General Secretary of NATO or United Nations and offered the perspective to rule the world, and at the same time he relaxes and gives other people possibility to do their own stuff, being on his imaginary throne somewhere on the International Space Station, that would be even better scenario, probably, because from there he could be taken to the Hague, to the tribunal. I don't see the scenario where Russian elite makes a coup, because for now he is the real guarantor. And for now, we don't see any forces in Russia that could conspire against him, which are really unsatisfied with status quo, even if the situation is becoming more and more turbulent, even when we see that Russian security services are given carte blanche, and they can prosecute anyone, any bureaucrat, any governor, any minister. Still, it's not the big deal. Still, Russian political elite prefers to keep it this way and wants not to think about what's going to happen after Putin. But after Putin is going to be, for the world, for Ukraine, and definitely even for Russia, it's going to be better. So that would be my best case scenario.
If I can jump in, I absolutely agree with Mikhail that the departure of Putin would mean really a lot for the war and for the region. And the reason for that is that I don't think that any politician in Russia would be able to continue on the same path that is also so damaging for Russia itself. Of course, it's horrible for Ukraine, but it's not good for Russia and for Russian economy, for Russian society, even for the regime that exists today. It's not a positive thing. So I don't see any figure who can continue on the same path after him.
Or who wants.
Okay, we're going to now, thank you so much for that conversation. We're going to bring in some people to ask questions live, and we'll also be asking some from the chat room. Our first person is Erica Monahan, who is so influential in making this program happen today. So great to see you, Erica. If you want to unmute your microphone, you can ask the first question.
Hello, thank you so much. Thank you, Shivan, for putting this together. Thank you to Serhii and Mikhail for being here. I'm really thrilled to get to hear your perspectives. I guess I was looking at the calendar and recognizing that today is August 20th, the day that Navalny was poisoned, and his plane was rerouted. He was sent to Germany. He recovered. He went back to Russia, where he is the strongest voice of the opposition was put in prison and died at the hands of Putin. And I was just thinking about what I would ask you as I'm remembering Navalny, and then thinking about as well this summit that just happened, and also thinking of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and how Trump, Bob Woodward reported that Trump has insisted that he saved Prince MBS from facing consequences for this murder of a journalist. And my personal opinion is that this is really bad stuff. But I guess it leads into my biggest question, which isn't historical, and that is, will the system right itself? Do you, or what are the chances of returning to a world order where the defining alliance is the US-European alliance? Or we know afoot from, Peter Thiel to Curtis Yarvin that from Putin himself, or saying in 2019, the liberal democratic order has, crested, its day is past. We see a lot of moves towards authoritarianism. It's playing out so murderously in Ukraine. What are your views? Will the system right itself, or are we moving towards something quite different from the constitutional democratic order that structured the Western world since World War II?
I can start. Thank you, Erica. I'm happy to see you, and that's an amazing question because I think it's really deep, and it shows us that basically the problem is not only Putin. Sometimes I jokingly call it Putinization of the world, but it's not only about Putin. It's about the fact that really a lot of people in a lot of countries kind of stopped believing in democratic values and stopped believing in that religion as if liberal democracy could be called a religion. That is a very popular idea in Russia today. And if someone from Moscow joined us right now, he would say that definitely Soviet Union collapsed because of different reasons. But one of them, and probably one of the most important, was that Soviet people lost faith in communism, and there was no idea, there was no ideology a lot of people believed in. So after that, Soviet Union was doomed to decay, and after long decay, it collapsed because there was no religion behind it, and so those ideologists from Moscow right now would say that inevitably United States are doomed to collapse because it seems like a lot of Americans stopped believing in democratic values and in liberal democracy. I hope that it's a bit more complicated than that black and white approach, but we see that definitely there is some basis behind those theories, and it's not only about America, it's about a lot of countries in the world. India, that used to be called the biggest democracy in the world, is doubtfully a democracy, and we have much more examples. Being cynical authoritarian politician seems to be more effective and seems to bring much more popularity in many societies, especially in those societies which used to be democratic. And the problem is, and I thank you for mentioning Alexei Navalny, that unfortunately we don't have the heroes of democracy. We don't have those people who could be seen struggling for that ideology, for the values. And Alexei Navalny was probably for Russia was a unique figure in Russian history as the politician who gave his life for democratic values. Navalny's legacy, Navalny's message was very simple. He was saying and writing that Russia is not an exceptional country. Russia is not doomed to be the empire forever. Russia should become normal European democratic country like any other European country. And there is no difference between Russia and any other country, between Russians. Russians are not different in DNA. They are not predetermined. And that idea that democracy is okay for Russia, democracy could be Russia's future, is a very important message that Alexei Navalny left behind. And I really hope that's much more. I believe in that. I want to believe that that message would be distributed, will be kept between his followers and would affect new generations of Russians. Because for now, new generations, future generations of Russians will have him as an example, as a role model, as some kind of Russian Martin Luther King or Russian Messiah who truly believed in democratic values. And that's why, hypothetically, that idea could prevail one day after, I would stress, decades of from now. And I think that that's very important for not only for Russia but for other countries. This struggle for values, it's not culture war. It's the war of values that is going on in the world today.
Okay, and see that we're getting close to the 1 o'clock hour. If you have to leave, audience, feel free. We're going to continue taking some more questions. There are so many good ones coming through. We have Gunnar Knapp here. And if you want to unmute your microphone, you're up for the next question.
Yeah, thanks very much. I actually have two questions which I'm very anxious to ask, and maybe if you have time, if you're able to answer either of them would be great. The first question would be, it's extremely difficult for Americans to really understand this conflict, given the sort of the real complexity of Russian history and Ukrainian history and everything that's happened, not just in the past century, but before then, and all the things you've been talking about. So my first question would be, what is the single most important point to try to convey to Americans to counter Putin's and propaganda about the so-called root causes of the war? In other words, if you try to take this very complex topic and say, this is what you got to understand about Putin, whether you're going to explain that to Trump or you're going to explain that to normal Americans, or if you had a chance to say it on Fox News, what would be the most important thing to say about that? And my second question would be, if you have time, given the reality of the things you've both talked about with regard to the reality of Putin's mentality and the situation in Russia, and the additional unfortunate reality of our President Trump in the United States, what is the best strategy now for the Ukrainians and the Europeans? What can they do given this reality? What is their best option going forward?
Yes, maybe I will jump in. First of all, to Erica's question, on the 21st of August, there will be anniversary of the assassination of Leon Trotsky. 1940 it happened, and it was the darkest moment maybe in world history. But we are here, so dark times pass. So if the World War II eventually was won by the right forces, and if this war ends with the victory for democracy, then the future of democracy looks brighter for the world as a whole. So it's in very general terms. And regarding the root causes, one thing that it's very important to understand, that whatever Putin means under root causes, The real root causes are that he is not fighting for this or that region in Ukraine, as it is often imagined in the United States, that somehow you can draw the line in the right place and all of these things will disappear. So this is real estate sort of approach to the war. The root causes is reestablishing control over the post-Soviet space, where Ukraine is the largest post-Soviet republic. The root causes is bringing the world back to 1970s, as Mikhail was saying. That's the place, historically, the place from where Putin and his elite are coming from. The great power status now, not for the Soviet Union, but Russia. And this is one of the reasons why Foreign Minister Lavrov wears the sweatshirt with the sign USSR there. So there is a clear connection, and it is being demonstrated. So the point is that it's not about territory in Ukraine, and it's not only about Ukraine as a whole. And if we understand that, we'll understand also that appeasement leads actually only to one thing, and this is encouraging of further aggression. So it's not whether this or that city or region in Ukraine would go on this side of the border or another. It's actually whether we will allow Putin to win or not. That's the real question about this war that matters for Ukrainians, but also matters for the United States, and at the end of the day matters for Russians as well. And I guess the second question I somehow made, what the best strategy can be for Europeans and for Ukrainians? Well, the US, it's important for Europe, for Ukraine, for any really democratic country to keep US on what I consider to be the right side of history. It is a very difficult time also for the US, rethinking, reconceptualizing what is important, what is not, what US can do and cannot do. And we can leave Ukraine and Russia outside of that equation. But for every future of the United States in the future world, the alliance with Europe is extremely important. And in these conditions, Europeans are not they're also in a very difficult place in terms of the future of their democracy. But they are certainly are the force that can help US to stay in the democratic camp and maintain its position as a leader of that camp and the world as a whole.
Okay, we are running out of time. I want to ask a question that came in the Q&A. Do we have any knowledge of how Moscow's wartime policies have uniquely impacted indigenous communities in the far east of the region? We often don't consider that the modern-day Russian Federation is still an empire. Is there any hope for initiatives like the Free Yakutia Foundation or Free Buryatia Foundation?
Yeah, unfortunately, we know quite a lot, and we know mostly thanks to the efforts of these organizations like Free Yakutia and Free Buryatia, which monitor what is happening in those regions, in regions like Yakutia, Buryatia, Tuva, and so on, where indigenous population live. And we know that the percentage of those representatives of those ethnicities drafted to Russian army is enormous, and it's uncomparable to the percentage of the Russian population. So yes, it's a tragedy for all those ethnicities. Some groups who live in Altai, ethnic minorities in Altai region are, I'm afraid, are endangered because the percentage is huge, and definitely we know how it works. Usually the most depressive. The poorest regions of Russia are the centers of that. It's not the mobilization. It looks like a voluntarily signed contracts, but usually those people who live in the poorest regions of Russia are eagerly sign all those contracts. And unfortunately, we know that propaganda and brainwashing is especially active in all those regions. The number of the amounts of money offered to the representatives of those ethnicities seem to be comparatively huge compared to the average salary of those regions. So yes, we know that it's a terrible tragedy for Siberian peoples.
Okay, and we're going to bring on one more question from Kathleen Tarr. Welcome. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's been a fascinating discussion. Really appreciate it. I was living in Krakow, Poland in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. And I had gotten a copy of this foreign affairs journal. It's called The New Eastern Europe. And so my question has to do with internal politics in Ukraine. According to this journal, a segment of Ukrainians in Western Ukraine are more likely to want to integrate with Europe. This is a very simplified interpretation. And that the Ukrainians who live in the southeast portion of Ukraine are more conservative, more patriarchal, etc. As an American, as some people have already said, trying to get a better understanding of what are the internal politics of Ukraine right now. Is there such a polarity? And is that one of the reasons that Putin thought his invasion of a sovereign nation was going to be possible because of this split in Ukrainian politics? Thank you so much.
And maybe I will start. Speaking about the 2014, that was certainly the vision that, or at least that was the understanding that was shared certainly by academics in the United States, in Europe, and that was also the basis for Putin's actions. And the way how the war started with the annexation of the Crimea and then the so-called hybrid warfare in eastern Ukraine really was treated as a proof that that understanding was correct, that there was no resistance to the Russian army, and there was some proportion of the people on the streets welcoming either pro-Russian separatist units or Russian army and Russian mercenaries. And that was also Putin's thinking when he started in 2022 the so-called special military operation. And what we all discovered in 2022, that map that was drawn back in 2014, that the way how the political scientists, the Ukraine watchers were thinking about Ukraine didn't apply anymore. That Ukraine was united, that the resistance was happening all over Ukraine, particularly in eastern and southern Ukraine. I have the most recent book on the war called Chernobyl Roulette, where I discuss the Russian occupation of Chernobyl nuclear power plant, where the most, in terms of its ethnic background, the most international team imagined was on the Ukrainian side, and they decided to take Ukrainian side, the side of the weaker country in the conflict with the stronger one. So really, the 2014, when you read that article, when the journal journal was published, I know people who work on it. This is an excellent group of people. So that reality of 2014 really now belongs to the realm of history, and for people like me, historians, to study it. Really, 2014 changed Ukraine. 2022 showed that very clearly, and with every passing day of the war, Ukraine is is changing. Certainly the level of the mobilization, the level of resistance has been amazing. We still don't know about everything that is happening in that society. The polling practices during the war, they are not particularly accurate. But yeah, that's society. That drama, that tragedy certainly changed in the Ukrainian society.
Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. Unfortunately, it went much too quickly. I want to thank everyone for coming today. We began today with the idea of moving from history to reality. And what we've seen is that the two are inseparable. History shapes reality, and reality rewrites history in turn. And here in Alaska, a place with its own history between Russia and America, we're reminded that today's negotiations and tomorrow's peace agreements will not just be headlines, they'll be the next lines in history. Alaska World Affairs Council. Thank you to Professor Plotky and Mikhail Zeiger for sharing your insights. And thank you to everyone who joined us today online. I hope you come back again. We will have an exciting lineup of programs coming onto the website of the Alaska World Affairs Council at alaskaworldaffairs.org. And we hope to see everyone again online and in person soon. Serhi, it was such a pleasure to see you again. I had the pleasure of hosting you, like I said, 2019. And Mikhail, I hope you will also consider coming to Alaska. It'd be wonderful to show you the great state of Alaska in person one of these days.
With great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay, everyone, have a wonderful day. Thank you so very much.
Bye-bye.